Yeah. You're listening to Autodesk's Digital Builder Podcast, a show that inspires construction professionals to innovate and use technology to improve how they build our world. I'm Eric Thomas, and I've been working in construction for nearly a decade. And now I have the privilege to sit down with industry trailblazers to hear how they're solving construction's biggest challenges and redefining the future of the built environment. Welcome to Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. Today, I am joined by David Purdon, Technical Director from Diatec. And today, we're here talking about all things automation in construction. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine. Thanks for asking, Eric.
I appreciate you joining me here and coming back for a second time. That means the first time didn't go too badly. I feel like we had a really great conversation with our friend Merrick last year. So it's going to be fun to continue that narrative and thread. But first off, I have a question that I didn't tell you that I was going to ask you. So buckle up for this one. I'm putting together a digital builder playlist. And so I'm really curious, what are you listening to right now that you're really excited about? Any particular bands or music or anything that has you fired up?
Mostly hip hop and metal. So it's Run the Jewels, kind of the greatest hits, and a little bit of Metallica.
Nice.
And then somewhere in the middle, I might throw a little bit of Wu-Tang or something. So
I like it. So definitely adding the Metallica in there. Run the Jewels is great. I'm actually a big metal head myself. So we're going to have a conversation later on about this one just to make sure we can compare notes on which metal bands we're big fans of and which ones maybe not so much. But let's pivot back into construction because I think this is what the folks here are actually wanting to hear us talk about today. Can you give me a bit of an overview to start us off about what the heck do we mean when we talk about automation in the construction industry?
if you go back maybe say 10, 15 years, at the whole start of digitization of the construction industry, a lot of clients would have been looking around at their software portfolio and looking at what they were using to deliver projects. As we move through the phases over the last 5 years, probably the last 3 years more accurate, we end up with a lot of disparate pieces of technology. But the focus has now shifted to not about looking at how we deliver projects, but how do we run our businesses. So the challenge is to make all these systems kind of sing and dance together, and to keep the value of the data that you're generating, because that then influences how your projects are being delivered, but more importantly, how your business is functioning. So the key thing with automation is you start looking at all these kind of separate processes and technology, and you look at, well, how can I make these things talk? But it has to be rules and governance about how you move your data between different systems. So that's really where the automation comes in.
There's so many things happening in construction right now where, 10 years ago, there weren't a lot of purpose-built tools. And so this wasn't as much of a challenge to connect those dots between the different systems everybody's using. And I think it's behooving for everybody to think about not getting too deep into shiny new toy syndrome until you figure out what exactly do we want to do, what tools and technology, because if you bring too much in your, intentions for automation and you haven't thought through how that data is going to move around and how we connect it, you've got a new challenge in your hands to figure out how that actually happens. It's not surprising to me that folks are starting to think about this more intentionally and more regularly, but I think it makes sense, especially as we're, beholden to so many consistent challenges in the construction industry. So I appreciate that kind of baseline as far as where we're at. What tools right now are you seeing out in the market right now to most commonly connect all of these threads and bring all of these different, ecosystems, for lack of a better descriptor, together so you have that seamless transfer of data and automation that we're talking about here?
Well, the tools vary depending on the circumstance for obvious reasons, but I think the most common ones are probably predicated by the type of tools that clients already have themselves. So if you look at the common areas, every client has a project delivery system of some sort, whether it's ACC or any other variant. But what's common with them is they all have enterprise level tools that manage their businesses. So, we kind of look at that and say, well, what do you already have in place and what can we leverage to do the things that you need? Common ones really are things like, Microsoft Power Automate, which is a big one. And then obviously from an Autodesk perspective, we have things like ACC Connect or Cato. And we kind of use the tool based on the premise and the circumstance of what the client has. But they would be the main ones. But the reality is we're kind of moving away from that now as well to looking at building things from scratch using web development, front-end, back-end development as well.
Can you tell me a bit more of that, building from scratch? Because it's always interesting to hear where, some of the off-the-shelf tools might not fit those needs. And I'm hearing more and more organizations are developing those internal tools. And I think it's kind of a two-edged sword, because on one hand, a lot of organizations are off the shelf bringing new features and they're building those resources to deliver these features. And so sometimes I've heard that you spend a lot of time internally building a tool and then it's released as a feature for something you've already got like 6 months later. And how do you balance that? So I'd love to hear a little bit more about your thoughts there.
Well, the reality of it is if you take any software vendor, they will build a tool based on the commonality of need across the industry. That doesn't service every client because every client's unique. They have internal needs, they have external needs. So where, the whole development around automation and even delivering bespoke tools is around factoring in what that actual individual client needs. Now, you might find across 10 or 15 clients, there's a commonality in that need. So you're able to replicate that and scale it. But generally speaking, each client would look at their individual processes and what the individual use case is, and then you try and scale that into what the business need is. So you take something as simple as moving data from platform A to platform B, you'll have an individual use case, but then the key to it then is to look at across the rest of the business and say, okay, can we replicate this? Can we scale it? Is there any kind of variance that needs to happen? And then it's the user experience. Is this something that has to happen in the background? Or is it something there has to be some sort of level of interaction with? So depending on that need, you either go with a back-end automation or you go with a front-end web development.
It makes a lot of sense. And there's so many needs and requirements. And I think the tools that are the most successful that are out in market right now are the ones that are as flexible as possible to meet those needs. But it isn't surprising that there are some use cases that are unique depending on those tools that are being required. I'm curious to hear a bit more about the conversations that you're having with folks right now too. Are they coming to you and saying, we want to automate this? Are you advising them? And how has that changed in the last 5 years?
The big change is the maturity and understanding that clients have now. It's like they know what's capable in the market. They know that, most vendors, most cloud tools, software vendors have, application programming interfaces, APIs, and they're aware of the capability of these APIs. So that what they do then is they match that against the processes and the requirements and their outcomes. And then we try and fill that little gap, which is, okay, well, how do you put this together? But the key thing is the individuals within these organizations know the processes inside and out. That's not our role. Our role is to disseminate the process and say, well, out of everything that you're doing from point A to point B, what can we automate in the middle and just free you up to do what your job is, which is, making the business be successful as best you can.
Do you have any examples you could share as far as where those gaps are right now that folks are dealing with? I always love to get a little bit deeper because, folks who are looking to do this can say, oh yeah, no, I'm having that same problem as well. And, potentially jump in and maybe give you a call and see if they can help them close those gaps.
More than welcome. Yeah, the key ones is, industry trends are that the concept of a common data environment is not a singular source of information in one platform. It's scattered across multiple platforms, but there are rules and requirements that dictate how information should move from system to system. The other part of it, so when it comes to things like sensitive information, when it can be publicly available, when it shouldn't be publicly available, you need to consider these things. Perfect example would be clients who want to do, let's say, pre-construction tender processes. Most of those people will never touch a live project environment, but they need to develop information that dictates what happens in that environment. So they will use tools like SharePoint or on-prem systems, but we then create automations that will work off the rules and regulations about how that information from a life cycle standpoint eventually gets moved over to the system. So it could be ACC, it could be any other common data environment, but we work with the client to say, okay, well, when is that information ready? And how does it go to that other system? And what are the rules and the dictates that decide when that information moves? We would put in an API automation that would say that when a piece of information moves from stage to stage, it goes to here, it goes to there. Ask a person to contact them for a notification to say that that information is now ready. Can you review it? Things of that nature. Those would be the most common ones, which is rather than thinking about a common data environment as one place, it's an ecosystem of tools. And then you put the automations in that dictate the rules of engagement.
I love your pre-construction example too, because that speaks to my past experience. And like we do all this proposal work and we put the estimate together, and there's a lot of decisions made during that pre-construction process on how the building should be built. And if the person who then is executing that, which sometimes is not the same person involved in the estimate, depending on how long it takes for that project to be awarded and all kinds of other factors, they might not know that nuance. And they sit down and they go build it and they go, well, I don't know how you can build it for this amount of money, because they weren't part of this unique betterment that had been offered. And transferring that knowledge and that data, when I was doing this, was still, here's our SharePoint server in a folder with, final V2, final V3, 75 spreadsheets and, a dash of sadness mixed in because nobody's really sure where we're going to go from here. So I think it just makes sense when folks want to be able to seamlessly move, because that takes time. And even if we're just thinking about the time aspect of it, or possibly the human error aspect of it, where we have a mistake mixed in that was introduced because somebody grabbed the wrong document or an old document or lost something, like you have this record and you can move that information around in a way that just has so much more meaning. So I love that example. That's great.
Well, I think the key thing what you said there is continuity and consistency, right? If we can remove points of error from a human standpoint and we can automate that, it removes that level of error that can creep into your systems. But again, it's all predicated by understanding the process. So whatever automation we put in, it has to respect the process, but it also then has to evolve the process in many ways as well, and by maintaining the integrity of the data. But the last thing I would say about it is that you've also got to understand as a business, not everybody wants to work in that one system, and it doesn't suit. So some people are comfortable from an enterprise standpoint working within, the Office 365 environment, SharePoint, like you mentioned. But then you have the other part of the business who are delivering the project. Their native environment is the common data environment and the project delivery environment. So, it's about marrying those two things, but respecting the autonomy of the information and who owns it at different times.
It makes a bunch of sense. I mean, you can think about it even from just like a scheduling perspective. Like when I'm putting proposals together, I'm working with somebody, at least in that moment, who was in Primavera Pre-6, and they're putting the schedule together. I have no visibility even into what this tool looks like. I just need the thing. And at that point in time, it was simply, hey, here's the PDF. And then we look at it, mark it up and go, oh, we need some changes. We need a different view. And then we have to go back to them and they manually make that PDF. I was talking to a woman yesterday, and we were directly leaning into that as far as print it out, mark it up, scan it, send it back. In the tools now, and I believe ACC actually offers some of this now with the scheduling functions, is you don't have to manually mark that up. And you can get those different views and you can filter things in a way where you're in the environment you're comfortable with, and you don't have to know anything about P6. And it opens up access to data in a way that gives a more equitable look at it, but it also reduces a lot of that manual time. And you don't have that bottleneck anymore. You don't have a singular person who is the scheduling wizard that you need to come in and talk to, because you do have access and in the format that you want it in and you understand and are comfortable with. So it goes so far.
Yeah, well, the schedule one's a good example, because if you look at how the scheduling methodologies, you have, a team within your organization who manage the schedule across your projects, right? But then the reality is that information has to permeate across the rest of the project delivery team. But then how does the feedback loop work? Well, how do you get information back that, affects that change? So if you look at schedule, we look at work plan, that's your direct methodology, which is, we publish the schedule, we maintain autonomy of it, we manage that as much as we can. But when people are on site and are doing their tasks and something slips, there's an immediate feedback. And then that can then be passed into the master plan, schedule gets updated, and the cycle continues. But that's all background automation. We're giving you the information, act with it, react to it, and then send it back to us to work on.
And I think that feedback loop that you're talking about here is so critical, because for a long time, I think a lot of folks didn't have it because they didn't have the mechanism to, and the expectations, the pace that we build is, it's always relentlessly moving forward. And with this automation and common data environments and training folks to understand how this process is supposed to work, now it's not just that feedback loop for a singular project. This is a feedback loop that's company-wide, whether it's with your partners, with your specialty contractors, or any of the above. And now you're able to make more business intelligent decisions for the sake of the company based on data instead of on gut feel. And you can even start narrowing down to a point where you go, okay, we realize now our schedule always slips when we're working in this particular environment or with these particular groups, and we can narrow down and figure out why instead of just going, well, that's just the way it is. You have more and more information to inform those decisions, and it's a really great opportunity.
Well, it is, and I think if you look at how the most successful businesses within our industry is they understood that very early, that the data is the lifeblood of their success. But what drives that and what makes them make the decisions is we're in the business of mitigating risk. When we deliver projects, we try and mitigate that as much as possible and minimize it. But the key to that is having a consistent process. Now, if you have any variability into that because of, human interaction or multiple disparate tools, then you're not mitigating that risk. You're having to try and factor into acceptable losses and things of that nature. But with automation, we're able to minimize the impact of those things, move around them where necessary, or even just bypass them entirely and say, we're going to move the information from A to B And we're not going to worry about what happens in the middle because we're going to take care of that with the automation. So that end of it, it gives you an informed business. And an informed business is a successful business.
This actually nicely leads into my next question for you. And I want to know more about how artificial intelligence and machine learning fit into this bigger picture automation narrative, because data is such a critical portion of the success of leveraging artificial intelligence. And so I'm not going to color your perspective here. I want to hear your thoughts before I start sharing my opinion, or I'll go for the next 10 minutes.
I mean, it's such a scattered brain, kind of scattergun approach to things in terms of AI, because everybody has like different views and leanings into how it should be done and how it should be used. From our business and from our company's perspective, AI and machine learning should learn and kind of lean into the learnings and understandings of the people it's serving, right? So when we look at how other clients are looking at AI, it's more about it understanding and following and watching successful and good practice, and then bringing that intelligence in. So when those circumstances arise again, you have that to fall back on and say, well, that circumstance happened before, and here's how you dealt with it. And this is the variability depending on that one. So, these are your options and these are the outcomes. So again, coming back to informed decisions and best practice. But where I think is going to have a massive impact is a lot of what I'm really seeing at the moment is we have an aging workforce, and all that tacit knowledge and skill was locked into these individuals across the industry. And a lot of clients are looking at going, well, how do I modularize that? How do I take that learning and that tacit knowledge and kind of put it into a system where I can onboard the next generation of experts and skills? And I think AI and machine learning, if we're using it within our tool sets, it can actually start to understand the behavior. Well, why did that person make that decision when there was 5 other decisions? And they can look at the commonality of the decision-making process. And then when someone comes in and has a similar scenario, you've now got that wealth of knowledge that's been built up in the data bank that the AI is leaning on. And you can say, well, here's how that person would deal with it, and here's how this worked out the last time. These are your options. So I think from a construction standpoint, I think that will be kind of the big leverage that people will look for, is try and find some way of kind of modularizing all that in their knowledge across our business and put it into a system that works for everybody.
And at this point now, the data becomes increasingly important, but also the accuracy and the quality of that. I mean, we all hear about, ChatGPT hallucinating when you ask it questions, and that's, a very real end user perspective as far as, okay, this gave me information and this was inaccurate. And these tools obviously are continuing to develop, and like Autodesk has been doing really innovative and interesting things with AI for 4 or 5 years now, with things like Construction IQ. But I think as these tools scale in their capabilities, like you're speaking to right now, where we're trying to retain and leverage this knowledge from people who are soon to exit this industry, and we need to contain and continue that business continuity, it's going to be increasingly important to find innovative ways to do that. And the data quality that goes into this is going to be key into getting insights and perspectives that are meaningful and real and true into the course of the business. There's a lot built into that.
The key to it is the value of the data. Because if you think about it, I have a couple of key clients who are actually here with me today. And the way they kind of look at it and say, well, I want to be able to go back and look at how my business performed 5 years ago. And I want to measure that against predicted and, projects that are coming online, so I can look at the variability between the two. But to do that, you have to have measurable data that you are capturing at source. And then you have to have some sort of methodology to absorb that intelligence of that data and then put it into some sort of format that people can read at different levels. What a CEO wants to look at is entirely different from a project lead, but it's the same data. It's just how do you change the lens to make it relevant to the people who need to see it. The key to that is measurable data. The key before that even is capturing the data. There's method to the madness in many respects.
And there's a lot of training that needs to go in at the baseline to make sure folks understand how you expect them to capture the data and the standards that are associated with that. And I think everybody over in Europe is a little bit ahead of the curve, and so maybe we are in the United States, in that you have ISO 19650, there are BIM mandates in place. And so there are standards that are implied by the governmental level that force folks into a level of consistency that we may not have from state to state. Here in the US, I feel like we have a lot to learn from some of the teams that are across the big ocean there.
No, I definitely agree. I mean, I think if you look at industry in Europe, particularly, especially UK and Ireland, the 3 areas of focus have been people, process, and technology, right? But it was people would look at one area first and then put that in place and then try and figure out the other two. It's like the old kind of project management triangle. I can give you, 2, with the exception of the third one. But the reality of it is what they're doing now is like they're looking at the gaps between those 3 things. So like they have the people, they have the skills, They have the technology and they know the processes really well. But now it's about optimization and efficiency. It's not like reinventing the pyramid. It's about, leveraging, making it more lean and agile.
It makes a lot of sense. I mean, we've made so much progress and the tools are here now, unlike, 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And we're just continuing to augment and iterate. And I think the automation conversation plays a huge part in this,
Massive.
just increasing that efficiency and that focus so we can let people focus on the things that they need to focus on and, let some of these more manual tasks of either moving data around, if it's something as simplistic as that, or gaining that visibility you were just talking about with dashboarding for the right folks to really up-level this in a meaningful way.
If you look at the amount of data any organization generates on a day, 90% of it never sees the light of day again. Once it's processed, once it's parsed, and once it's stuck somewhere. The key to is try and dig into that and kind of do a bit of gold mining and say, well, is there any value in what we're generating here? Does it have any long-term value? And with automation, you're kind of removing a lot of the kind of tedious tasks in the generation of it, but you're also then having the ability to farm that data and say, right, we're going to give it some rules and some logic, and then we'll get the values that we want out of it, and then we can use that as an informed business. But I think for me, what I look at in terms of the industry is that we're going into an industrialization phase. It's like process engineering. We're industrializing the construction methodology. To do that, we need to have consistent processes, but that's leaned against, we're all aiming for consistent outcomes. Start with that and then work your way back to present day. And then that's how you work out your plan.
And I love that we're moving that narrative forward so intentionally right now, because a lot of folks, at least in the United States, had been hesitant to talk about prefabrication and modular construction for a while because there was a perception that things might not be built to standards or it was, cheaply built or something. It couldn't be further from the truth today. You can build some incredible things with a factory process. We have so much that we can learn from our manufacturing friends in reducing the amount of people on site, improving safety margins, improving quality because it's built in a factory and not out in uncertain conditions on site. But a lot of technology is going into streamlining that process so you can actually build what you intended to when you were putting it together or starting to put the parts together in the factory. And I'm just grateful that people are really embracing this because I think it's one of those big tools that we can leverage as an industry that is going to help us do more with the challenged resources we have today and not to push something like, I hate the do more with less because I don't think that that's a good and positive framing, but it's being more intentional with the resources that we have available to us. And I think that is one of those tools that we have in hand.
I think so. I mean, do more with less is a kind of an old word.
I hate whenever somebody says that to me, I just shudder and so I'm like, no, don't say that.
I think what we're doing now is we're learning from the other industries around us and taking the best practices. Like if you look at even the concept of BIM, BIM is based on the Toyota method that Toyota created how many years ago? And if I look at process engineering, I look at things like Lean and Agile and Sigma 6 and stuff. These are all things that clients are bringing into construction. They're looking at what they do from a process management standpoint and from a process engineering standpoint. When you talk about things like modular and off-site and on-site fabrication, that's taking the variability. And at the end of the day, by removing the variability, you're protecting the thing that you're trying to protect, which is your margin. So I think
risk management strategy.
Pretty much, and I think it's about when it comes to gaining business, like my clients are looking to have consistent relationships with their clients. And the way they do that is they deliver consistent projects. And to do that, they have a consistent methodology, which is based on standard technology and now automation practice that streamline that down.
I love that perspective. And I think there's so much more going on there. So I'm going to pause my brain on that because I'm going to talk about it for the next 25 minutes and everybody will be very tired about it. But I got a couple more questions for you, David, and then I'll let you get back to your very busy day. I'm curious, what trends are either you excited about right now in the industry with technology, or what are you hearing the most about from your clients right now that they're just fired up about? I know we touched on AI and machine learning. I'm curious, is there anything else right now that has your attention?
I think the key thing is clients' focus is not about doing more with less. It's more about efficiency and optimization. So their goals and focuses is we want to do what we're doing really well, but we want to do it better. And to do it better, we don't need to kind of rip up the rule book. We just need to finesse it. We need to optimize it. I think the other thing as well is that they're trying to optimize their technology stacks. If you look at, say, maybe the last two major upheavals within the organizations and industries, 10 years ago, BIM became the kind of the predication of what we have to think about as an organization, as an industry. And then obviously we had lockdown a couple of years ago. That was a massive ramp up in technology. Clients literally had to move their businesses to the cloud to survive. You come out the back of that, they've basically inherited all this technology and they're like, well, what do we do with it? Is there any value? So the key thing is they're trying to optimize and look for efficiencies because that's where the gains are. So a lot of the work that we do with clients is about looking at what they have, not looking at what more we can put on top of it and say, right, we'll work with what you have. You like SharePoint, fine, let's connect that into your process. Okay, ACC, yep, let's connect that. But I think ultimately what we're trying to do is let people get back to what they're supposed to be doing, which is their jobs. Don't worry about how the technology works. We'll figure that out for you. But just tell me your processes and we'll implement it for you.
It's one of the silver linings that came out of a very challenging few years for everybody is this acceleration of technology adoption was a huge benefit to our industry at large. But it does make a lot of sense when we step back and look at it where the automation conversation is happening now, because everybody steps back and goes, okay, how do we use these tools that we've now adopted that we hadn't thought about previously in a more effective way? It's really an opportunistic moment for our industry, I think.
And I think the other trend that I'm seeing now is that we have a tech-savvy generation coming into our industry. They're expecting these things. It's not a case of like we have predicated methodology before you arrived in here and you need to follow it. It's like, if you want to hire the best people, you need to have the best processes and technology available to entice them because they won't come. It's as simple as that. If you want to bring people onto a building site, it has to be a little bit more sexy than just wearing hard hat and boots. I
agree with you completely. I mean, if you're thinking about it and you're looking at two companies that you're going to go work for, one of them has a very advanced and very thought out tech stack, and you get to use laser scanning and 3D printing and VR and augmented reality and all these really cool things. And then you've got a company next to it who might be very successful in their own merit, but they're very paper-based and they've got old processes and they're thinking about it in a more traditional way. Most folks my age or younger, and let's be real, we're talking about people younger than me at this point now.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to look at that and they're going to go, this is where I want to go. And I understand and agree. It makes a lot of sense and it makes them excited and interested in how they work. But also I'd say if they're looking at the old archaic processes and they're manually moving data around and not using these tools, they're probably gonna be kind of pissed off at the end of the day too. They don't want to deal with that.
Pretty much, you're advertising yourself as a business. Like you're trying to attract the best talent. The way to do that is you need to showcase the services that you offer your clients. And how do you do that? And obviously there's trade secrets and company secrets you don't want to divulge, but you still have to advertise to draw that talent. And I think by having, really streamlined processes, good technology, consistent outcomes, that's the thing that a new generation coming in go, well, I want to work there because I can see progress, I can see innovation, all the things that incite, and especially if there are, a generation of tech-savvy people, that's the thing that's going to draw them in.
Yeah, there's an expectation there that's completely understandable that we have to meet to make sure that we're making this industry attractive to come to work in. I mean, it's a lot of work to do to keep folks flowing in that are excited about this work because there's a lot of things that need to be built. The world needs the construction industry to be successful. And I think we have a lot of responsibility on our end to ensure that that continues to move forward as we make this appealing to more folks every day.
The roles are evolving. The traditional roles that you see across the construction companies, some still exist, but there's a lot of new roles that 5-10 years ago, the construction company go, why would I need an API developer?
Yeah, why do I need a data scientist?
Exactly.
Yeah. So which is awesome. You see now, yeah, it's a huge evolution.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a sure sign that these companies are looking at the 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan, which is, okay, if I want to be around in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, I need to start rolling in these methodologies and practices because I will not have a viable business that's sustainable in 5, 10, 15 years.
I agree.
And especially bringing in that young talent, that's their expectation that you need to meet in the middle, which is I need these tools and I will deliver the outcome that you're asking me for.
Yeah, we're on the same page exactly on that one. There's a lot of work to do, but the companies that are looking into the future are already making these choices. And I'm really encouraged by it. There's a lot of good things happening, but there is a lot of work left to do. But David, I got one final question for you. I'm going to have to go back and see if you answer it the same this time around or if you come up with something new for me. But I'm curious, what is one tool that you bring to every project that you work on?
I think I probably said pencil the last time.
All right.
From memory, because, writing down notes is probably a key thing. I would probably say a spirit level because, I just, you look at something, you kind of eyeball it and you think it kind of looks level. And then you come back a week later and you realize you need to take that shelf off the wall because it's going that way.
Yeah, you set something on it slides off.
Yeah, I think the spirit level would probably be the main one that I use now. I do a lot of kind of work at home, kind of renovating my house. Nice. So the spirit level is literally in my back pocket no matter where I'm going. Constantly sit on it as well. So yeah, I'll say spirit level just for a change.
All right, I like that. It's the old, measure twice, cut once.
Exactly.
You don't want to get yourself into trouble.
Consistent outcomes, as they say.
Exactly. I've got tape measures scattered throughout my house for a very similar reason, because one, I lose them consistently and constantly. And so if I only had one, I'd never be able to measure anything. But two, I'm starting to get into the renovation dance or thinking about it. It's like, is this going to fit here? And so
I joined the club. It's great fun.
fun and frustrating at the same time.
Exactly. Equal measure, by the way.
I've gotten very good at deciding or what projects I'm going to have somebody else do on my behalf and what I'm interested in undertaking myself. Anything with a high level of finish or detail, I let somebody else do, because I just simply don't have the skill set to do it in a way that makes me happy when I look at it. And I will see the irregularities so much more if I do it myself.
Yeah, I think the key thing is if it's electrical or it has plumbing involved, don't go near it. let some expert do it for you. But I've ripped out like cabinets and worktops and stuff, and put a saw on it and stuff, like things like that are fine. But again, the spirit level is the key thing for me.
Yeah, your plumbing comment makes me chuckle. I put a shark bite cap on a piece of copper in my basement about a month ago, and there was a moment when I turned the water off and I got everything going, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to cut this pipe now. I wonder if I'm going to flood my basement. I was really anxious about it.
That moment of like, oh no.
And I thought I drained everything, and I still got a decent gush of water right at first. And there was the, oh no. And then it calmed down. I was like, all right, we're good. Like,
well, it's a nice kind of like variance from what you normally do. Is like, I put in a new kitchen sink at one point, and I had everything all turned off. And I put a connector on the tap. And as soon as I turned the water mains back on, everywhere. It's a good way of expressing yourself with a few choice words and a few swear words. Just get out your system. But yeah, highly recommend it. Highly recommend it.
I agree with you on that one. Well, David, it's been an absolute pleasure having you back here again
Pleasure
today.
Mine.
Thank you for joining me. And for everybody out there, if you've just walked up or you're wondering who I am, of course, I'm Eric Thomas. You can find me on LinkedIn or on Twitter at builder_digital. If you are interested in following the show, you can find us on YouTube. I'm surrounded by cameras and lights right now for a very good reason. Otherwise, we are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all the other standard players. So until next time, goodbye.